Hey, Bengals fans, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider, a very special edition of the Orange and Black Insider. Normally, we record on Wednesday nights. Unfortunately, all of our hosts, myself, Scott, and Connor Howe, our schedules are a little wacky this week, but we're coming at you Monday instead of Wednesday. Again, Wednesdays is the standard day. We hope you can join us, even though our schedule has altered a bit, but we wanted to make sure to still pump out a show. We've got a lot of fan questions that have been sent to us this week. Once again, a lot of great ones. So we appreciate that, and we're going to get to those at the end of the show. But it's kind of a special Valentine's edition of the Orange and Black Insider, and I am joined by my co-host, Scott Schultze. How are you, sir?
Doing good. Excited. Like you said, tomorrow is the feast day of St. Valentine, and of course, we're both married men, and we know nothing is more romantic than talking Bengals.
That's right. That's right. And I titled this episode "Love is in the Air." So, obviously since it's Monday, if you're listening to this show, obviously Tuesday is Valentine's Day. So if you have not gotten your cards, your flowers, your candies, whatever it may be for your significant other in your life, get that
Your Bengals
done.
ticket.
That's right. You maybe ask for some Bengals season tickets or something like that as a Valentine's Day gift. But happy Valentine's Day to everybody that listens to this show, downloads it, and tunes in live. We already are starting to get some live viewers, so we appreciate that. Again, if you want to catch this show and or contact us, we are available on a number of different mediums. You can check out all of our content on SB Nation's fan site for the Bengals, Cincy Jungle. All of our stuff is on there, whether it's posts regarding the segments on our show or the podcast itself, that's there. We also have SoundCloud and YouTube channels. You can subscribe to those. And we do this show live every week, both on Cincy Jungle and on YouTube. So you can join us in the chats there and submit some questions in those chat rooms. We'll try and get to those. And we're also available on iTunes for download, or you can contact us via Twitter if you're on there, at BengalsOBI, or via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. All right, self-promotion aside, Scott, let's continue with, again, we do these positional assessments. I think they've been really fun to do, both looking back at some of the issues that plagued positional units in 2016, which not many very few positional groups were immune to criticism last year, but also what's ahead for some of these groups, who the team might add, some interesting names, might it be free agency or the draft or both. And this position is one, we're going to try and talk about two if we have enough time here. Let's start with the wide receivers. Both of these, but this position group is very interesting to me in 2017. Okay, so the team has star receiver AJ Green, who was on pace to have what seemed like a career year last year. Unfortunately, he got hurt towards the tail end of the season and missed the last, I believe, 6 games. Just fell short of his 6th straight 1,000-yard season. If you know, AJ Green is a competitor, and some rumors had him a little upset about him not suiting up. He thought he may be able to suit up towards the end of the year, but the Bengals didn't push it. Didn't want that hamstring injury to get worse. And even though they were still theoretically alive at the end of the season for the playoff push, for the playoff picture, that is, I think most fans would say, long term, this is a guy that maybe has, 4, 5, 6 years left. Let's not risk something incredibly damaging to him long term. And obviously the team felt that way, and unfortunately his vacancy was felt in the offense as the year wore on. Brandon LaFell stepped up, did play pretty well throughout the rest of the season. Tyler Boyd had some nice moments. Cody Core in very limited action. Another rookie had a couple of nice plays, though again very limited in terms of his snaps and all of that. Alex Erickson, same kind of deal. So I guess, Scott, looking at 2016 and into 2017, is this a group, because there were basically 3 rookies and 1 new guy off the street, there were a lot of good moments from this group, but there were a ton of dry spells as well from this group. Is it because of all of the new personnel and the lack of really that group having a lot of experience together that we saw with Andy Dalton, Green, Mohamed Sanu, and Marvin Jones? Or does the team need a an elite playmaker going into 2017, opposite of AJ Green, while these young guys continue to develop and maybe supplement those, a new star receiver alongside AJ Green.
I think if you're looking at as far as the production, I think there's probably two big things. One, that probably can't be understated. We lost Jay Gruden a few years ago. We lost Hugh Jackson last year. So we're breaking in a brand new offensive coordinator who had never been an offensive coordinator before. And I think we saw that, especially early in the year with the play calling, some of the way the offense was trying to move, how it didn't move. So I think that definitely hurt some things. And then also, as you mentioned, there were a lot of young guys. So outside of LaFell and Green, and obviously, as you mentioned, I mean, Green is elite. He is one of the top receivers in the NFL. Outside of them, it's just a very young, very inexperienced group. Your top receivers after those top two were Tyler Boyd, who was a true rookie, Cody Core, who is also a true rookie, James Wright, who got in a little bit at the end, who is has been there a few years, has never really emerged much as a receiver, Alex Erickson, who is also a rookie. So it's just a very, very young group that you just really need to see take the next step. And you made a very good point about what they may do as far as going forward, and that's a very interesting thing, because if you look at the roster as it stands right now, AJ Green, I mean, obviously, he is great. Outside of him, you have a lot of questions, because you have Boyd going into second year. He did pretty well his first year, 600 yards, 54 receptions, only one touchdown, but the whole offense was kind of down in that regard. So he looked like he took some step, in the right direction for a rookie. Outside of that, you had Cody Core, who flashed a few nice things, especially later in the season. And outside of that, you just have a whole lot of, you just don't know what you have after that, because James Wright, he's in his last season. He's never really emerged. Alec Erickson, for being active every game, he only caught 6 passes, so they obviously don't see him as much a receiver. You don't know if that's going to change going forward, or if they just see him as a punt return guy who probably could be fighting for his job next year. And he may not even be on the roster, depending on who they bring in the draft, who they bring in during free agency. If they think he gets beat by someone as far as a punt returner, if they never cut Adam Jones, that might be another possibility as far as returning. And then behind that, you have guys who have never really played. Jake Kumro, who we talk about every training camp as this, this is going to be the year. Then you have Chris Brown and Alonzo Russell, who are both kind of practice squad futures kind of players. So you don't really have a whole lot of experience. And it kind of makes you think they're probably going to sign someone as a free agent, just because this is a team who likes veterans, and just having that, being that sparse, it's just really hard to imagine them not bringing someone in, at the very least for depth. Someone who is probably going to make the roster. Probably they may not become the number 2, but someone who is going to provide a little stability, a little bit that veteran presence that Marvin Lewis likes. The one encouraging thing is your top 3 receivers, depending on how you look at it. I'd argue AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, Cody Core are your top 3 receivers. All 3 of them are signed for 2017, 2018, and 2019. So that is the one encouraging thing, is you've got 3 guys all locked up for 3 more years. If they use a high pick or medium pick on another receiver, you figure that guy's probably in the mix in the top 4 as it stands right now, and he would also be locked up for 3, 4, 5 years, depending on where they draft him. So that is the one encouraging thing, is that for as old as they're getting in other positions, we've talked before about their window declining. Yeah. This is kind of the one encouraging thing, is, hey, you've got an elite receiver, and your next few guys you've got locked up for a while. So assuming they take that next step, assuming guys like Core and Boyd can emerge, and I think the big thing with Boyd, which probably affects the direction they go, is what do they see Tyler Boyd doing going forward? Do they see him as nothing more than he's just an inside guy, slot guy? He's the guy who's going to be in there, but he's not that true number 2. He's not that Marvin Jones. He's not that second guy. Or do they see him as that second guy? And depending on what the Bengals' answer to that question is, which we probably don't know right now, that probably affects the direction they would go as far as free agency, and then in April in the draft. If they would really seriously question, taking a guy high, or if they feel, no, we're pretty comfortable, these are our top 2 guys, we just need to fill in, some depth here and there.
Yeah, it's a great point about Boyd. And it's kind of funny if you were to look back at like 1990s NFL offenses, early 2000s NFL offenses. You kind of had the traditional package. You had your star big guy, and then you had the guy that was more of the chain mover who played more outside. And, the slot thing wasn't really talked about until really the past 5 or 10 years. And now offenses are far more complex, and teams are specifically seeking out guys that can play in the slot. And Boyd seems to be that guy. Now, it's a great question to ask with his, where do they see him fitting in? Is he a guy that can do both? Is he a guy that can play outside and inside? Is he more of a little bit slighter Mohamed Sanu, where his strength is strictly in the slot and moving the chains, making those tough catches? That's what we saw mostly out of him last year. Now, he was pushed to the outside a little bit now with the injury, but it's very difficult to predict what the Bengals see out of him in terms of long-term viability on the outside, or if he is a guy on the inside that they say, we still need another outside option, whether it's a speedy guy, whether it's LaFell, whether it's a guy in the draft, whatever the case may be. You bring up a great point about Boyd with that. Now, if you were, and I don't want to spoil this for later because one of our fan questions kind of revolves around this. Now, Scott, would you prefer, do you think Brandon LaFell, because he had his second best season as a pro under the Bengals last year, statistically speaking, second really only to the season he had with Tom Brady and the Patriots, which in itself is impressive. So do you think he is the best plan of action for the Bengals to move forward in 2017? Or should they really look at using a top 10 pick on an elite, quote-unquote elite talent at wide receiver, maybe a top of the second round, or maybe someone else who's a bit younger in free agency than Brandon LaFell?
I think if it was me, I'd probably lean towards someone like a LaFell, someone like an older free agent. And the only reason I say that is I'd really like to see Boyd get a chance. And what I saw, I thought he did really well. And unfortunately, let's say they take someone like the kid from Western Kentucky or the kid from Clemson at number 9 overall, that player's probably going to see a lot of snaps. It would be kind of silly to draft. I know we talk about them not starting guys they draft in the first round. That's usually on defense. On offense, they tend to start the guys more often than not as soon as they draft them. But that brings the question, okay, now we have A.J. Green, you have, let's say, Mike Williams, just for the sake of argument, and you have Tyler Boyd. So you have 3 fairly young, really good receivers. The problem is I don't think our offense, we're not the New Orleans Saints. We're not a team. I don't think the offensive coordinator, I don't think the pass protection is such that we're going to stand back there and fling it 40, 50 times a game to justify having all 3 of them. And then, oh, by the way, you have Tyler Eifert and Giovanni Bernard, who are both very good pass receivers for their positions. So just from that perspective, based on the way the offense is set up, especially since they always say we want to run. We have just 2 running backs. Even if we get 2 yards of carry, we're going to keep running on first down. We're going to run on second down. I'd be surprised to see that investment pay off unless there's something they're planning in the works that the fans don't see as far as what they're going to do with this offense or a direction they're going to take. So assuming they don't use a high pick on receiver, then that brings to the free agent question. And the only reason I say a veteran guy over a young guy is just because a lot of the guys we have now with Cord and Boyd are both young already. Green's obviously your one old guy, old compared to the group, obviously is still pretty young. Is the idea that you'd like to have someone in there who you could step in right now. You're not really looking for a guy with a whole lot of upside, but someone that, okay, this guy knows what they're doing, kind of like what Brandon LaFell did. He came in, he's a professional, he steps right in, he kind of knows his role. You're not really projecting him long term, but you don't have to because you have Boyd and Core sitting there, and potentially someone else depending if they do draft someone. So I think because of that, you'd probably want someone that could step in, ideally behind Boyd. If Green gets hurt, if Boyd doesn't take that step forward, if Core doesn't take that step forward, you have that third option.
Yeah, and the whole thing with the wide receiver group in 2017, and I'm going back to kind of how I started this segment, is is it simply growth and continuity that's going to make the team better on offense in 2017, especially if you bring back LaFell, his second year in the system, Boyd, second year in the system, Core, second year in the system, Erickson, second year in the system? Is it simply getting those guys more reps, more time in this Bengals system, and building the rapport that Sanu, Jones, Green had with Andy Dalton? Or is it a talent issue? Is it, LaFell did great things. Maybe he overachieved a little bit based on his career stats. And the fact that he was basically the number one receiver once Green went down and was seeing more targets as the season wore on. Cody Core has a lot of physical skills and a lot of traits you like, but he was a 6th round pick. Erickson, undrafted guy. Boyd, a 2nd round pick. So I guess the team needs to figure out if it's continuity and, hey, let's get these guys together. Let's build what we once had with this group. Or is it, we need an influx of talent, or is it both? Do you have any thoughts on that, Scott?
I guess I'd say I think it's kind of hard to judge that, only because the offensive line just struggled so much this year when Smith was, and a lot of people were, I never seemed to think Smith was as bad as a lot of people thought he was, but there was a huge drop off to Boyehi, especially early in the year, where Boyehi was constantly getting beat. We've obviously talked about how Bodine gets beat. Whitworth was still good. He wasn't the same Whitworth of a couple years ago, where he gave up 0 sacks and hardly any pressures. And then Clint Bowling on the left side was injured, playing all year, hurt. So you really didn't have the time for the guys to always get open. And I think sometimes you saw times where Dalton did have the opportunity and the receivers just weren't getting open. But then you saw other times where he just didn't have the time to throw the ball. And you could say, well, no one was open, but it's only 1 or 2 seconds in, and we weren't, for some reason, and I think this goes back to offensive coordinator too, is if you're getting beat, if your offensive line isn't giving you the time to block, you've got to run the shorter routes. You've got to find a way, kind of like what the Patriots seem to do. They always run those quick little slants. They always, have that Wes Welker, Chris Hogan, someone, Julian Edmond, that's going to run that 3, 4, 5 yard slant and run it, and you're going to have your receivers. Someone's always going to be. The Bengals is, for whatever reason, we're not doing that. They're just, we're going to run a more traditional offense. The guys are going to run medium, longer routes. And in the meantime, Dalton's sacked. And so I think that's part of it too. It's really hard to say because Dalton's season wasn't as good, but at the same time, if you're not getting the blocking and you're taking away his top receivers and you're insisting on running and you're letting the defense kind of dictate the situation because we weren't scoring, the other teams, we weren't leading. And obviously, offense and defense kind of go together. And I think that's another thing that sometimes is getting overlooked is that, okay, last year we had this great offense. We were able to score a lot of points. So what happens when we do that? We're forcing teams to play catch up. That lets our defense, play a little more pressure because we know they have to throw a little more. We can kind of dictate it. And then when we're leading, we can run the ball. We can kind of dictate what we do. We can throw when we want to when they're trying to stop the run. This time around, we were playing catch up a lot more often. So they knew we had to throw, and we were fairly predictable in when we threw. So I think a lot of those things just all went together to work against us. So it's really hard to isolate one variable from that and say this is what hurt the Bengals in 2017.
Yeah, and it's a great point you bring up about the pressure and the issue of guys not getting open when there was a clean pocket. And that's what makes this is why I don't envy the Bengals front office when it comes to talking about the wide receiver and tight end positions this year, because obviously you want to fix the line, whatever that may be. Maybe there's more experience from Fisher and Boyehi that helps. You re-sign Zeitler or Whitworth, and you hope for better results there. But as the year wore on, you definitely saw guys not being able to get open with regularity. The flip side of that is, well, is that just because AJ Green and Tyler Eifert were hurt and out of the lineup, and so defenses didn't respect it? But then you look at that and you say, okay, maybe that's a depth and talent issue behind those guys being hurt. Obviously, Tyler Eifert's a very talented guy, but he's missed a lot of time. So You need to have able replacements if those guys go down. So it's a very, very tough call. I know readers at Cincy Jungle and our listeners have on both the wide receiver position and tight end position and what the team should do this offseason. Speaking of the tight end position, we can kind of briefly look at that as well, Scott. Obviously, on paper, the team seems pretty set at the position. You got Eifert. He's obviously a star when he's healthy and out there. They have Tyler Kroft, a third-round pick from a couple of years ago, and then they have C.J. Uzomah from the same draft who did improve last year and show his ability to be a pass catcher in this offense. There's also Ryan Hewitt as the H-back. Here's my thing. I think that this year taught us something about the Bengals in that their depth maybe wasn't what everybody thought it was, at least at certain spots. You mentioned Giovanni Bernard also as a passing option. So Giovanni Bernard's coming off of knee surgery. Tyler Eifert's coming off of back surgery. They're slated to probably be ready by training camp or a little bit after and be ready for week 1. We all know with this medical staff that could change. Kroft, all of a sudden, after kind of being the set number 2 tight end in 2015, took a backseat to Uzomah. Uzomah's not really known as a blocker. Kroft can block a little bit. I don't know. Should the Bengals look at upgrading tight end or bringing in someone else and replacing, obviously not Eifert, but one of those other backup guys? Or is it just, let's look at wide receiver, let's look at other spots and let the chips fall where they may?
When this is going to sound crazy, sometimes I like to say things that are absurd. And so I'll just go out there and say, I know a lot of people talked about them possibly drafting a receiver in the first round. I would not be surprised to see them possibly draft a tight end with that top pick, if there's someone even worth it at number 9, which it doesn't seem like there is. And the reason I'm saying that is they tend to draft people when you draft them, you're like, what in the heck? Like when they took Drake Kirkpatrick, when they took Tyler Eifert, we're like, what the? Or when they, even when they took Oboihi, people were like, guy's injured, really? Like,
William Jack's surprise.
Yeah. And so they tend to make these odd picks, and they come out and say, well, we're building it for the future or whatever. And you look at, okay, we have the 3 tight ends, as you mentioned. I'm going to put Hewitt in the fullback, H-back kind of. I'll move him off for. But just looking at those 3, Eifert, he's only signed for this year. Obviously, he's an elite stud, tight end when he's healthy. So you would think, well, they're obviously going to sign him long-term. But you don't really know that given their history. We talked last week how they tend to be more of an outside-in team. They tend to focus on the receivers, the cornerbacks, the tackles, the defensive ends, less so on guards, centers, linebackers, defensive tackles, and tight ends. And when they drafted Eifert, especially after drafting Jermaine, it was Jermaine Gresham. It was a huge surprise. But when he's out there, he obviously is a core part of their offense. But just given if you look at what tight ends of Eifert's caliber are getting, and even guys who aren't that good at his level, they're generally averaging about 4 or 5 years, $9 to $11 million. You look at what sorry, mine just went blank. The guy who was in Denver and went to the Jacksonville, Julius Thomas.
Oh yeah.
Look at guys like him, Kels, some of his other people, what they're getting, and you figure Eifert, even with the injuries, he's going to get that. And then the question is, are the Bengals going to be willing to put that much money down for a guy that has that injury history? And if they don't, this is his last year, unless they franchise him, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense if he's an injured player, because then you're going to probably be paying him $12-13 million, depending what the tag comes out to be for that year. So, okay, you've got Eifert for this year, then that's it. After that, you have Uzomah and Kroft. And as you mentioned, they used a 3rd-round pick on Kroft, which kind of surprised a lot of people. And after the draft, they said, well, he was kind of under the radar. He blocked a lot, but he's a really good receiver. He seems to have been supplanted by Uzomah, who was a 6th-round pick. And Uzomah really didn't do much when he was in college. So he was kind of a surprise pick, too. And they both got a lot of playing time early in the year, especially because Eifert was out. And you look at what they were kind of used for. They both averaged like 8 or 9 yards per reception. Eifert was much closer to like 12, 13, 14. They I think they both combined for 1 touchdown. Eifert had 5 in limited time. So they obviously, at least in their first year, weren't being used the same way. I do remember Uzama having a couple long catches, but generally they were both being thrown a lot of short safety stuff. When Dalton was under pressure, they weren't really targeted in the red zone. So the question kind of becomes, okay, if they do or don't sign Eifert, which is still up in the air, they obviously haven't signed him yet, coming up on his last year. So you would hope if they're going to sign him, extend him, they usually like to get those guys extended before the last season so they don't have to worry about it when they hit free agency, which kind of made the Drake Kirkpatrick thing kind of surprising. And then if they really think Croft has not taken that step forward, that Uzama, who can't block, passed him, and they have always been a team that has put a lot of emphasis on the tight end blocking, that we want a guy who can go out there and do both. He needs a block, and I think anyone who's been a fan for at least 5 or 6 years remembers the Hard Knocks episodes where right after they drafted Chase Kaufman, and what did they do every episode? They were getting after him because he couldn't block anybody. And so if Uzama can't block and he's passing Croft, that kind of tells you Croft may not be what they thought they had as a receiver. So assuming they don't sign, long story short, if they don't sign Eifert, and if Uzama can't pick up the blocking, they probably are going to be looking another direction at tight end after this year, which makes you think they might even be drafting a guy, which I think would surprise a lot of people. So that's why I said it sounds absurd, but I'm just going to throw it out there as a possibility.
Yeah, I don't think number 9 overall is probably going to be a possibility. There's really only one elite tight end in this year's class, and that's O.J. Howard out of Alabama. Other guys are kind of second-round guys, third-round guys, at least projected. I don't, and with Eifert on the roster, I'm not saying pick up a tight end at number 9 or pick up an elite tight end in free agency necessarily. But I think based on, like I said, Uzama opened some eyes last year, and he made some nice plays, but he wasn't really wow. I mean, I guess he was wow for a 6th-round pick in his second season, but he wasn't, totally tearing it up. Croft has not really impressed me all that much. Eifert is, as I said, he's great when he's healthy. He's a great red zone threat, but he's not healthy all that often. So I think there needs to be another type of contingency plan. And in a season where the team went 6-9-1 and they aren't, they were not very good last year, I think a lot of positions need to be up for review, and they can't be complacent with some of these guys in terms of lack of competition and so forth. I'm going to say this. You brought up Gresham, which he is obviously a guy that fans are he's a very polarizing guy amongst Bengals fans. He's got a lot of big stats in terms of historical reference with Bengals tight ends. He's up there with the tops of them in terms of like yards, catches, touchdown receptions, that sort of thing. But a lot of people remember him for critical drops. A lot of people remember him for critical fumbles, critical penalties, all of that as well. And rightfully so. I mean, there were some big moments there where you just wanted to tear your hair out with the guy. I will say this, and I've never been a big Gresham backer. The last season Gresham was here in Cincinnati was 2014. As his career progressed in the last couple of years of his rookie contract with the Bengals, he really honed in on improving his blocking and was a pretty decent blocker with the Bengals as a tight end. And he improved on that as from a rookie until his last year with the Bengals in 2014. If you remember, what was Jeremy Hill's best year as a running back with the Bengals? Last year was okay. Didn't fumble the ball, but the yards per carry were lower, got in the end zone often. He was a star in 2014 as a rookie. Now, I don't want to say it's directly attributed just to Jermaine Gresham, but the fact that he is a better blocker than any tight end that the Bengals currently employ at that position definitely has something to do with that, especially when so many passing options that year in 2014 went down with injury as well. I think the Bengals need to get a well-rounded tight end, not necessarily just one of those awesome pass catchers, a guy who can come in and block. He can move the sticks a little bit here and there, maybe do some things in the red zone. Whether Croft can develop into that guy, I don't know. I would hope so. But given the fact that we saw a regression from him, at least from a depth chart perspective last year, I can't say I have a ton of faith in the guy. Would you agree, Scott?
Yeah, I think at this point we have to be looking at Uzama probably as the number 2, and
right.
I think he's definitely more of a receiver. I was actually surprised when he was the one getting all the playing time instead of Croft, just based on the draft positions and the things the team had said. So clearly Uzama had opened some eyes, and he kind of reminds me of one of those guys you take a flyer on late in the draft who has the athletic tools that you hope he can emerge, and he, granted he hit 200 yards, but he seemed to emerge a lot more than people were expecting. So it kind of makes you wonder, okay, going into year 3, and historically that was always the year for wide receivers when they really had their big breakout. Before the modern era, when you just throw to them from day one, like Green and Julio Jones and Odell Beckham and so forth. But could this potentially be a huge breakout year for Uzama as a wide receiver? And I'm not saying he's going to have 1,000 yards, make a Pro Bowl, but could he end up being one of these guys like a Julius Thomas that, I think he was drafted, 6th round out of Portland State or something. I mentioned him earlier. I'll throw him out again. The guy you really had no expectations for if he, succeeds, if he makes a team, that's all positive. But the fact that Uzama did, show some potential, he did show some flash here and there, it kind of makes you wonder, hey, maybe this is but like you said, he's not a blocker. And that kind of takes you back. And you were talking about Jeremy Hill. That's if I have my years right, during some of Rudy Johnson's best years, they had Kelly at tight end.
Yep.
Yeah, who was not a receiver in any sense of the word. Made better than Daniel Coates, but that's kind of just by default. But he was a inline blocker, and that is what he did, and he did it well. And that is, the one thing that when Eifert was – and Eifert's a solid blocker, but he's not Jermaine Gresham. He's not Reggie Kelly. He's someone that he's not that blocker. And you kind of hope Croft is, but the fact that Croft's number 3 at this point, and it kind of makes you wonder, okay, they've been doing a lot of this Jake Fisher and the jumbo package, Jake Fisher, the tight end eligible, a lot more than they used to with tight end eligible packages. And it's not that Fisher's really a great receiver. He doesn't have the greatest hands. He had a fumble. So he's fumbling maybe 1 every 2 catches. But it kind of makes you realize that they obviously have a desire to have a blocking tight end. And they probably don't think they have that with Croft. They probably don't think they have that with Uzama. So it makes you think that, okay, Fisher's probably, especially if they're going to make him a full-time starter at either the left or right side going forward, that they probably are going to look at a blocking tight end at some point, unless they think they can develop Uzama into that.
Yeah, and obviously Reggie Kelly did a number of great things for the Bengals, even though it didn't show up on the stat sheet. He was an incredible locker room guy and a guy that I think most Bengals fans that are pretty attuned to what the team has done over the past, 10 to 15 years realize the value that Reggie Kelly did bring to this offense as a blocker. You also mentioned Jake Fisher and all of that. That's an interesting situation. And obviously Fisher, for those who don't know, at University of Oregon, I believe he was recruited and started his career as a Duck as a tight end, and then was converted to an offensive lineman from there. So the athleticism is there, and that's what a lot of teams liked about him when he came out of the draft, the athleticism, the feet, that sort of thing. I'm going to say this. The Bengals might be, granted they have a smaller scouting department than most teams in the NFL, they might want to start checking out some of these stud basketball players that can't make it to the NBA to add to their tight end group. You look at, the list is just kind of endless. Tony Gonzalez, obviously he was a first-round pick anyway, but Antonio Gates was another guy. Jimmy Graham was another guy that was a former basketball player that couldn't make it there, and a lot of people didn't know how good of a football player he would be. These are guys that know how to kind of be physical, even though basketball isn't known as a contact sport. There's a lot of hand work, obviously, and a lot of footwork that goes into that. And obviously boxing out and grabbing the ball that's, well over your head, that sort of thing. That might be an area that if they could find a diamond in the rough there, that could be good. That could be good. What do you think, Bengals fans? You can get in touch with us about the wide receiver and tight end groups, both how they performed in 2016 and what the team should do in 2017. We're on Twitter at BengalsOBI. We're reachable by email, theobinsider@gmail.com. You can also both download all of our stuff and leave a comment and or rating on our iTunes channel, our YouTube channel, our SoundCloud channel, and or at cincyjungle.com. And check out all the stuff at cincyjungle.com. Myself, Scott, and many other great writers are putting out quality material, even though it's a little bit of a slower time in the NFL calendar. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we are on the cusp of Valentine's Day. So hopefully you get your shopping done for your Valentine if you have one. And if not, have a couple of drinks and binge watch some Netflix or something. I don't know. But anyway, we decided, and Scott, this was your idea, which I thought was a great one. Since we are going to be celebrating Valentine's Day, we thought about doing something that talks about what you love about the Bengals. Now, I think, Scott, when you came up with this idea, you're talking more historically speaking. Whether it's a specific player, a specific memory, a specific game, that sort of thing. I know it's hard to maybe narrow it down to one. What'd you say there?
It was very open-ended, just
okay.
Related to love. Favorite memory, moment, player, attribute.
Okay. I know it is broad. And there are a number of different ways that you can go in, a number of different things you can say what you quote unquote love about the Bengals or some aspect in their history that you love about them. We are, I would say, probably in the middle range of Bengals fans in terms of age and amount of time watching this team. What are, if you can narrow it down to one or two, that's awesome. Or if you just want to quickly run through a couple of things that you think you love about the Bengals for Valentine's Day.
Starting with me?
I'm starting with you.
Okay. So it's very interesting because obviously it's, like you said, there's so many different ways you can take it and approach it. And it's kind of like picking, who's your favorite Star Trek captain? I mean, is it Kirk or Picard? And obviously the answer is Picard. But, you could also say, well, Janeway or Jonathan Archer or even, someone like Benjamin Sisko. So, or even like one of these like captains that they meet like in, some random episode. So you could argue, there's wrong answers, but not really any wrong answers. I mean, some people obviously love Chad Johnson. Some hate Chad Johnson. The thing I'm going with is like my favorite would probably be a favorite moment. And the moment wasn't so much anything particular about the Bengals. It was just the event and time when it happened was when our son was born. We were in the hospital, and I think he was, a day or two after he was born, we were in the hospital room, and they just so happened that the Bengals game was that Sunday morning, and we were laying there. So I ended up sitting there on the bed with him, and he had like his little, onesie thing on, these little, newborns have, and it was a football one, and might have even said, I forget if it said Bengals or football. But I went and got something like that from him at the local Meijer, I think. And so we sat there, in that bed watching the game together. So that was one of my favorite Bengal moments, was watching the game. So not really team related, but that was definitely one of my favorite. My favorite moment on the field that I kind of liked, only because of the rivalry and the history that I know. It's kind of unfortunate because in hindsight, the person who did this thing I'm about to mention has kind of retracted from it. But I really liked when Sam Weish called out the city of Cleveland. Just because at the time, and you have to go back to that time, and back in the time, the Bengals, Sam Weish, just the whole city, they were a much bigger rival with the Browns. The Browns were actually fairly decent back then. Yep. The Browns were playing in that, god-awful stadium, and they were known for throwing batteries and beer cans. And you just kind of knew when you went up there, you were just in for, a rough experience. It was a very rough, very difficult place to play. I mean, they had a huge home field advantage up there, and they just were a very rough team. The players were a rough team. The city was going through a lot. They It wasn't the kind of revival Cleveland you had now. It was more the rough Cleveland where, you still had jokes about the mistake on the lake and the river on fire and all this kind of stuff. So, to kind of get that jab in with the whole thing with Sam Weiss, that very heated, passionate, that was something that just really resonated at the right time. I think in today's politically correct environment, you probably couldn't get away with it. And his response seemed to be more, time with the, 2016 kind of era. But, back when that happened, I just thought that was a very awesome, just, it's a rival. And, dang it, we're in the NFL, it's a little more of a sterile game because you don't have it's a little different than college sports. You don't have as much of the tradition, as much of the camaraderie. You don't have, 100,000 people showing up and, alumni and all this stuff. You have it's a smaller kind of it's a different kind of game. You go to a big time, University of Texas, Ohio State, USC, you go a game like that. It's just something that's hard to replicate. So so when you get those chances to get that tradition or get those kind of things, where you really are, that's just, you have that feel. I just thought it was a wonderful experience. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling.
No, you're good. And, I like that you got a little sentimental with your story about your son. That's a very cool story there. And obviously, that's one of the cool things about football, and that does relate to. I'm gonna mention a couple as well. I'm gonna cheat and not just go with one. That's one of the cool things about football. That's because it is such a big sport in America, and growing now into obviously international with games in England and Mexico and maybe even Canada at some point. Obviously it's the biggest sport in America and probably the second biggest sport in the world behind soccer or football. And what it does, whether it's college or whether it's pro, it brings families together to, gives them an excuse to get together with your family, your friends. You tailgate at games and you go to the game, or you're huddled up at home and you're surrounded by family and friends and watching, and you're eating junk food and maybe having some adult beverages, playing some games and watching games. And now with today's NFL, the ability to kind of watch different games at the same time, not really miss much, whether it's, through DirecTV, Sunday Ticket, or the Red Zone channel, or however you watch it. There's always a neat experience, and there's almost a community aspect to watching football and NFL football nowadays. And once Sunday Ticket really took off, my brother and I and he and his son, my nephew, sometimes watch this show. So if you're watching live, or if you end up checking it out on Cincy Jungle, Brandon and Kellen, this one's for you. Obviously, all of my brother's family, we get to hang out with them. He's got 4 kids, who are all awesome, and his wife is awesome and very, very accommodating to hosting all of us on basically every Sunday or Monday or whenever the Bengals play, and we get together. There's ping pong involved. There's adult beverages involved. There's good food involved. There's also some work that's done for Cincy Jungle on my part. I do some post-game analysis and all of that. But it's fun. It's a great way to hang out with the family and an excuse to do so. My brother and I'm not going to go into too many details, but we kind of have our little superstitious rituals that we do every Sunday or when we can. And it's a great time and an excuse to watch the Bengals and hang out with family. And I think obviously we're all Bengals fans, but in order to watch the game and be able to hang out with family and friends, that's what makes it a very cool experience in doing that. Other than that, I'm going to say a memory I have, and it kind of spans a handful of years. Obviously, the early years of Marvin Lewis, everybody remembers that. But I was pretty young, but this is when I first started to watch football, and it was around that 87, 88, 89, 90, right around that time, Scott, when you mentioned you don't live in Cleveland, you live in Cincinnati type of stuff. If you remember what is now known as the old AFC Central, there was not only so much quarterback talent in the division. There was Warren Moon, Bernie Kosar, Boomer Esiason, and the Steelers at the time had, a handful of guys coming in. I think it was maybe Bubby Brister and Mark Malone and other guys kind of going in and out of the lineup at that point. But there was not only great quarterback play, there was Sam Weish, there was Jerry Glanville, there was Chuck Noll, and there was Marty Schottenheimer in the late late 80s, early 90s, depending on which team you're talking about. And these teams hated each other, absolutely hated each other. And it was old school. I want to take it to you. And the guy who everybody kind of just universally hated was Jerry Glanville. And if you have a chance, there's some really cool video. I think NFL Network on their top 10 a while back did the biggest rivalries in the NFL. And it was Jerry Glanville versus the AFC Central. And each coach hated that guy. And anytime there was super entertaining interviews with Sam Weish talking about Jerry Glanville and vice versa. And if you remember Jerry Glanville, he was just basically a cartoon character that was the coach of the Houston Oilers at the time. The Oilers, their colors were like powder blue, red, white, and that was kind of their colors. He always wore black. He left tickets at the box office for Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley, and I mean, he was just a character. And when these teams met, if they had an opportunity to run the score up on each other, they did it, and they hated each other. And a lot of times these games were hard fought and pretty close. A lot of times they were absolute blowouts, but it was almost comical because you could see the absolute hatred that these teams shared for each other. And in today's NFL, where everybody kind of pats each other on the back, and though there's been some stuff with the Steelers and Bengals, the rivalries that you saw in the late 80s, early 90s in the old AFC Central just isn't the same in the AFC North now. But that to me was always entertaining. I can remember specifically a Bengals game. I think it was in 1990. Sam Weish and the Bengals beat the Houston Oilers, I think, 63-7. And Sam Weish decided to kick a field goal with about 7 seconds left on the clock, up 60-7. So, at any rate, those are just some fun memories that I remember and things that I love about this team. That especially that era, that late 80s, early 90s, when they were really, really good for that snapshot of time. I really remember that, and obviously
that game. If I have the year right, I think that was the year we beat them, and then we turned around and went down to Houston, and they beat us by 40 points or something.
And they went to the postseason, and the Bengals did not. Yep. But I mean, there was hits after the whistle. It was a fun division because of all the stars at the skill positions. It was a brutal division because of how much they hated each other and how much they beat up on each other. But there was also great coaching that took place in that time, and that's something I remember. What do you remember, Bengals fans? What do you love about the Bengals now that it's Valentine's Day? We've told you how many different ways you can get in touch with the show. Get in touch with us. Let us know. And we would love to hear some of your memories and what you love about the Bengals now that Valentine's Day is coming up in 2017. Scott, I love this. I love this trip down memory lane, buddy.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting. Memory lane just made me think of 1800 years ago. Who would have ever, when Valentine was being martyred in Rome, he probably had no clue that people were going to be buying chocolate, flowers, and cards.
Right.
In his memory. And, who would have thought, all these years later, we'd be looking back at, kicking someone's butt 63-0 and reminiscing about and it's so interesting because it's such a different feel. I mean, and a lot of, I think the younger fans probably don't have the appreciation for the pre-free agency era.
Right.
And because the one thing that you really miss is, you had a lot of lifers. We have them now, the Pecco, the Whitworth, but they just aren't that common. You have a lot of guys that kind of bounce around, a guy who, gets cut, makes an air team, spends his 3-4 years, moves on. But, back in those days, it was just so rare. Even when you had free agency, you just didn't see a lot of movement. And trades in the NFL are pretty much non-existent for the most part. So, you had these guys who were, you were a lifer. You had Anthony Munoz, these guys who were in Boomer, who were, for the most part, up until the end of Boomer's career. Obviously they were always Bengals. Ernest Givens and those guys were, Oilers, and the guys were. Yeah, and so you had these guys who, you come to because you constantly played the same people every year, the same team, the same opponents. You didn't get as much of the opportunity to move around as have our teammates. So it's almost like living in a town or a country or state, long enough. yeah, this is my home. These are my guys, and this is who we like, and that's who we hate. And you, like you said, you don't get that as much now because there is a lot more movement, and so you have occasional rivals. But the usual rivals now are just, I just don't like that guy because he's a jerk on the field. It's not so much, dang, we've all been with this together, and we're the same team. We're the same players who've been here for a decade, and we just hate those guys. The fans seem to have that, but from the players, you get that a little bit, but not to that same level that you would have back then.
Right. And in case you didn't know, listeners of OBI, I was a history major in college. Scott obviously is a very well-versed man in the Catholic saints and the history behind both of them. So if you younger fans and you younger listeners who tune into Cincy Jungle and tune into this podcast, if you want a history lesson, go look up Plan B free agency and check out what that was. And it is no longer in existence. And if you want to know why the Bengals really started to decline at around 1991, 1992, 1993, check out Plan B free agency and the players that they had, like the lifers, quote unquote, that Scott was talking about, that ended up being fleeced from them based on Plan B free agency. So there's your history lesson for this week. Scott, that was awesome. I love talking about what I love about the Bengals. It's that time, Scott. It's that time. We got fan questions, and we've got a lot of comments / questions this week. We're going to try and get to all of them. Time is a little bit of an issue, but we're going to try and get to all of them. I'm just going to start with we talked about earlier. We talked about the wide receivers. We talked about the positional assessment of the group. We did get an email from unfortunately the person who sends these to us. He sent a couple to him, or he or she, Richards 2009. They've never really left their full name, so I don't know who to specifically credit. But I'm not going to go through it in full, but there are some mid-round draft choices that they brought up to us for, and these are just kind of, I just want to put these out there, both because it was a well-thought-out email, and number two, that the Bengals might be investing in some of these guys, especially if they don't go with a wide receiver high in the draft. So he mentions Chad Hansen, wide receiver with Cal. As a junior, he had 92 catches, 1,249 yards, 11 touchdowns. One guy that's near and dear to my heart, Darius Rogers, wide receiver from USC. He's a guy who really stepped up over the past couple of seasons. I've seen some good growth out of him. Tywan Taylor, he had a whopping 98 catches, 1,730 yards, and 17 touchdowns. And Cooper Kupp from Eastern Washington is another guy that could be on the Bengals' radar. Those probably within those rounds 3 to 5. So again, Chad Hansen from Cal, Darius Rogers from Darius Rogers from USC, Tywan Taylor, and Cooper Kupp from Eastern Washington. Those are all guys that we should keep an eye on, according to one of our listeners. So thank you for sending that our way. Now, that being said, Scott, we talked about, and we don't really know truly the best answer at this point, if the Bengals are looking to upgrade wide receiver, if it should be a free agent or if it should be one of those top rookies that are in this class. We received, and I believe he's still in the chat room from Waldo. He sent us a mock draft that he did, a 4-round mock draft. He got a little creative with it, and obviously last week, if you tuned into the show, you saw that we answered another mock draft. It's a bit different than this one, and it seems to address many of the perceived needs for the Bengals in 2017. A lot of interesting names, a lot of big names on this draft. Now, I want to preface this that Waldo did this 4-round mock by saying they give the Bengals trade A.J. McCarron and a 4th-round pick for the Bears' 2nd-round pick. So basically, in the 4 rounds, the Bengals would have their number 9 pick, 2 second-round picks, a 3rd-round pick and a 4th-round pick. So, Scott, with your permission, I'd like to go through this and get your thoughts on these guys. Number one, we've talked about some of these guys on this show previously, but I also want to see your take on positional value and what these players could mean for the Bengals if the draft fell this way. So, from Waldo, round 1, Corey Davis, wide receiver from Western Michigan, known as depending on who you ask, the best or 2nd best wide receiver in this year's class. DeMarcus Walker, defensive end from Florida State. And then the 2nd pick in the 2nd round, Gerard Davis, linebacker from the University of Florida. This is an interesting one. In round 3, Pat Elflein, guard or center from Ohio State. And then here's the big kicker, Scott. Round 4, Joe Mixon, running back, University of Oklahoma. And we obviously talked about his many issues on a pro draft. It's contingent upon a trade of A.J. McCarron. The Bears are definitely in need of a quarterback. So, that could make sense for them. A lot of ifs, ands, or buts with that draft, but very interesting, I thought. What do you think about each one of those guys?
On the surface, I'd say I like it. I think I went on the record last week of saying how much I liked Joe Mixon as a prospect on the field. Obviously, he does have that one incident off the field that has to be looked at. But if we came away from the draft with him as a mid-late round pick, I would say that's awesome. Another awesome thing, Pat Elflein, just because Zeitler's a free agent. The word on the street that a lot of the speculation is he's gone. So you really don't know what they're going to do at right tackle. There's a chance that eternal practice squad player Trey Hopkins might be over there. Christian Westerman might be moving over there. You don't really know what they're going to do on that side. Bodine has obviously struggled at center. Elflein would give you an upgrade over T.J. Johnson. He would also give you an upgrade possibly over Bodine. You would assume you couldn't do worse. And then the big one, obviously, the 1st-round pick, the wide receiver, Corey Davis. Everything I've read on him has just been sparkling. Unfortunately, I think I've been watching the wrong game film. I've watched a little bit of him just because this early in the process, it's really hard to know how the prospects are going to shake out after the combines and pro days. And what you really don't know what direction the Bengals are going. The few games I've seen of him, he seems to run the same route where he runs about 10 yards straight, just kind of stands there, hangs out. They throw him the ball, and then he tries to do what he can after the catch. I really haven't seen him do much as far as beating guys one-on-one, running a variety of routes, making contested catches. And I think I've just picked the wrong games. I just need to watch more of him because the few games I've seen, I haven't seen what people are raving about. Obviously, the scouts and the people who are paid to do this have seen a lot more. So I'm going to put my trust in them and assume he is as good as advertised. And if he is, I'm a big best player available guy. So even though we talked earlier how I don't know how the Bengals would utilize him and AJ Green and Boyd at the same point, but if they did, that would be a heck of an offense, especially if our coordinator could find a way to become more pass happy, to get the ball to these people while also feeding Eifert and also feeding Giovanni Bernard. And I don't know if that would maybe mean that they might be moving on from Eifert and not signing him after next year because you just have too many guys to get the ball to and your line's struggling to get block long enough. Long story short, I'd say, yeah, if we ended up with that draft, I really wouldn't have any complaints.
It's interesting what you said about Corey Davis. And granted, I haven't watched a ton of tape on him. Obviously immensely talented, but I agree with you that the route tree he ran at a small school is very limited compared to that of a Mike Williams. And that's a little concerning. And obviously he put up huge numbers, but he put them up against lesser competition as well. And that's where you go, okay, Mike Williams with the neck injury and, some other things going on, or Corey Davis with the incredible upside, small school, poorer competition. What's your flavor? I agree with it. I saw limited routes run. I did see him kind of do the, hey, go deep, let's toss you up one. and it worked well. So, I mean, I think you can do a couple of different things. It's more of the complexities of an NFL offense that worries me a little bit. And I think, granted, I don't have inside knowledge of this, but I think that that's where Mike Williams would probably have a bit of an upper hand, just because he probably ran closer to a pro type of system or pro type of route tree more so than Corey Davis did. And personally speaking, if the Bengals are going to take a wide receiver at number 9 and both are available, I would probably prefer Williams over Davis, probably just slightly. But I even though I know you build in the trenches and you build a championship team in the trenches, I part of me likes the idea of a receiver in round 1 or 2, just to really make this a high-powered offense. We've seen Andy Dalton play his best when he has an immense amount of weapons on offense. That was no more evident than 2015 when, all the gang was healthy and he had guys back. And, obviously that's a thing to it. The Joe Mixon thing, I just keep wavering on. Obviously he's an immensely talented guy. I don't see how you can keep Adam Jones, a guy who did punch a woman a couple of years back at a bar, and a guy who supposedly spit on a female jail nurse this offseason, as well as another guy who was on camera hitting a woman. I don't know how you can have both of those guys on a roster. Just from a PR perspective, obviously, Jones has sort of kept his nose clean since being with the Bengals, but there have been issues, and this offseason is probably the biggest and the most confusing if you've read the saga behind it. But Mixon's thing, I don't know, and it's obviously NFL insiders are going to have an idea as to, hey, this guy will he's going to go 3rd round, 4th round, or he's going to be available in the 6th round, 7th round, just because teams will take him off his board. It's yet to be seen. The talent there and the versatility as a return man, a receiver, and a running back just can't be denied, though. That's where you just you struggle. But I would have a problem with that pick if the Bengals ended up hanging on to Adam Jones this year. I do like that defensive end was addressed early, as was linebacker in that 2nd round. Again, that is contingent upon the Bengals making a trade with A.J. McCarron to get those players. I like the Elflein pick. The problem is we know the Bengals are stubborn with some of their players, some of their project players. We have yet to know if Bodine is their guy. He appears to be. I mean, he's now started for them, I believe, 3 years in a row, and last year was his best year as a pro. That's not really saying all that much, unfortunately. But I think obviously, whether it's Bodine, whether it's Zeitler who leaves, whatever the case is, having another interior lineman could definitely help, and Elflein's one of the better ones. So pretty good draft by Waldo, I think. We had another good one last week, so a very interesting one. One more draft question that we just received, Scott, a little bit ago from Sean Slaughter in our YouTube chat. Let's see, talking about the draft. On the Sports Illustrated website, they had the Bengals taking Leonard Fournette, Carl Lawson, and Anthony Walker. Any thoughts on that, especially the Fournette pick, which would definitely seem interesting? And obviously, if they did go Fournette, Joe Mixon would not be in the mix for the team later in the draft if that took place.
Did you have the post this week about the 1st-round pick, either Foster or Fournette?
I did not, but
okay.
there was some. Yeah, I remember seeing that on there.
And I thought that was an interesting one because obviously Foster is a name that a lot of people are mocking. But then again, a lot of people also really are enamored with Fournette, although he doesn't seem to fit because we do have Hill and we just signed Giovanni Bernard. That being said, I tend to be one of these old school guys who tends to take the approach that your running backs at the NFL level are only as good as your offensive line. Unless you have Barry Sanders back there, there's not too many running backs that can do much if they are getting hit as soon as they get the ball. And unfortunately, last year, and looking at the guys we currently have signed for this year, outside of Whitworth, the offensive line, if it kind of hit on last week, isn't exactly, the 1988 team. You don't exactly have Montoya, Munoz, those kind of guys there. So because of that, we tend to be doing as good of a job making holes for defensive linemen to get through as we are for the running backs to get through. That being said, I just don't think the Fournette pick would make a lot of sense, just because I don't see an offensive line that is going to be giving him, the room he would need to work. And I think they just have to address the offensive line before they would look at something like a running back. It's kind of like saying, I have this, 20-year-old Honda Accord and I'm putting brand new tires on it. At that point, it's nice. It looks nice, or fancy rims or something. Yeah, it's great. But, if that thing has 300,000 miles on it, you might need to replace the engine before you worry about, things like spinning rims or something like that. So that's kind of how I view running backs in the NFL. They generally tend to do as good as the line. You look at, there obviously are exceptions, but most teams, if you have a good line, most running backs will tend to do well. You have a bad offensive line, regardless who you put in, they tend to do poorly for the most part. Obviously, Fournette obviously could be an exception, but that being said, he would have to be really, really, really special to buck that trend. And I just think you have to get the line fixed before you worry about who's going to be running through that line.
Right. There are very few players in NFL history, really, that prove to be transcendent running backs that it didn't really matter who was blocking for him. Adrian Peterson was one. Walter Payton was another. There's a couple of others that you can think of. Now, if you view Leonard Fournette in that class, then obviously that's a franchise-changing pick. If he ends up being a guy like a Walter Payton and Adrian Peterson, some of these just ridiculous backs, then go for it. If you feel that, especially if you feel you can make do with what you have, and/or if you can re-sign Zeitler and/or Whitworth, go for it. But I do think there are other pressing needs with that, and I just hesitate a bit taking a running back that high in today's NFL. You saw Ezekiel Elliott. Obviously, we're talking just about 1 year, but he had a great year. But as you mentioned, Scott, behind a great line, behind an outstanding line. So
that's a line that even Darren McFadden had a good year last year.
Right. So, it just kind of depends. As for the other two picks that Sean mentioned, Carl Lawson is an interesting guy. He's more of a tweener outside linebacker, probably more of a 3-4 fit. I've been saying for a long time, I think the Bengals need a pass rusher like that, a guy that can rotate in and is more of a speed guy to complement the big guys of Dunlap and Johnson up front. I just don't think with the scheme they run, Lawson is a guy that they will take. They will probably take a more traditional 4-man front type of defensive end. But I do like the thought there. Anthony Walker, linebacker, great seasons in a row. 29 tackles for loss the past 2 seasons, 225 total tackles the past 2 seasons. More of a traditional 4-man front linebacker, and probably could be a decent fit in the Bengals offense. So that's kind of some thoughts we had for Sean Slaughter's question in the YouTube chat. Appreciate that. We do have a couple more that we'll run through, Scott. Obviously, one of the trademarks, aside from, and this is what one thing I love about Bengals fans is they are very well in tune with the players on the Bengals roster, what they need, and they're very in tune to the draft, much more so than many other fan bases that have maybe a bit more of fair weather fans cough, Steelers cough. I received a tweet. We received a tweet from a listener here, and it was talking about Victor Cruz, the wide receiver and it was from Philip Mack, 37 at Big Mac Gruder. So if you want to check him out, it was about Victor Cruz. And the other thing that the Bengals fans like to do, because they are so starved for the Bengals to make a big free agent move or get those big name guys, because the team rarely does it, they like to look at the waiver wire, see recent cuts, and see if some of these big guys who have been cut are ones that the Bengals might go after. And Victor Cruz is one that we are asked about. And if he's a good fit. We also have an article on Cincy Jungle about it. By the way, Scott, you mentioned the article about Fournette or Reuben Foster. That was by Jason Markham. And side note, Reuben Foster just had shoulder surgery done. Should be back by the time training camp starts, but that should knock down his value by some teams depending on how they look at it. So that's something to consider in the draft. But, Scott, do the Bengals need Victor Cruz in your estimation? Would he be an upgrade, or is he kind of more of the same and just a veteran guy at this point?
I think for him, and it really depends on who you're getting. I mean, he obviously had 2 insanely good years in 2011, 2012, when he had, I think it was like 19 touchdowns, 2,600 yards. Was this guy, huge yards per reception. I think he had like 18 or 19 yards per reception that first year. Every year since then, unfortunately, his catch percentage has gone down, and it's not because he's still catching, deep pass. I mean, his yards per reception is dropping, and his catch percentage is dropping. And granted, he was hurt the one year, and he got outplayed and kind of got demoted to third, fourth string behind Sterling Shepard, and so he obviously seems to be the odd man out in New York. He, I think, has something like 2 touchdown receptions the last 3 seasons. He would be a veteran presence. I mean, he'll be 31 this season, so you can't go. I mean, depending on what kind of person he is, it's kind of hard to say if he's what the Bengals need, if he has the speed. If he still has that speed where he's going to, throw out these long 30, 40-yard touchdown catches, then, yeah, sure, bring him in, because he's someone that, I mean, that was one of the complaints last year, was we didn't have someone that could take the top off the defense. I mean, LaFell, had some nice long catches, but he's not, a guy that's just going to burn past people. And I don't know if after the injuries, and at the age, if Victor Cruz is still that guy. If he is, it doesn't hurt him, bring him in. I would be surprised if the Bengals get him, only because, from what I recall, this is a fairly weak wide receiver free agency year, and some of the top guys who are entering free agency, a lot of the speculation is they're going to be staying with their teams. So Victor Cruz may be one of the top options, which means he's probably going to get overpaid a little bit, and I would be surprised to see the Bengals overpay, because they're generally not a team that's active in that first week of free agency when all the craziness happens. They tend to hang out, wait a few weeks, wait until a lot of the top names are gone, and they can take someone who's not going to risk them losing a compensatory pick. If Cruz makes it that far, if he goes the first couple weeks and no one throws an offer at him because they see he is slowing, he's not the same player he was, at that point I could see the Bengals possibly bringing him in. But before then, I'd be very surprised if he's someone they look at in the first week or two of free agency.
Yeah, part of it of classic Bengals. Big name guy, is coming off a couple of disappointing seasons, but had somewhat recently some big seasons. They might be able to get him cheaper than some think, just depending on he's had some injuries. There's obviously with Odell Beckham and other guys that the Giants have brought in. Cruz has kind of fallen by the wayside, and that's why they cut him. My thing with it is Cruz is more where he had the bulk of his damage was out of the slot. And the Bengals, we talked about this earlier, Scott. The Bengals need to figure out if Boyd is their Victor Cruz going forward, if he is their slot guy, and even if he's a number 2 option or whatever you want to call that, but if he's their guy that's going to work inside, then I don't see a use for Victor Cruz unless the Bengals don't have any more long-term plans for guys like Cody Cord, James Wright towards the bottom of the receiver depth chart, and Cruz is kind of your number 4 guy. At this point, I don't think Victor Cruz would settle for a number 4 role. I think he's probably looking for a number 2 role, number 3 role at a minimum. But if I remember correctly, he's done the bulk of his damage out of the slot, and I just don't think that's the kind of guy the Bengals need in the receiver group. I think they need more of a bigger boundary guy, whether it's, again, Brandon LaFell, whether it's a handful of Mike Williams in the draft, Corey Davis, or if it's still a guy who's relatively shorter but can stretch the field with his speed. I put up on Cincy Jungle a free agency spotlight of Marcus Wheaton, the Steelers receiver, who is probably going to not be with Pittsburgh next year because they have to pay Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, and they like Eli Rogers. So Wheaton's probably gone. And if you look at Spotrac, the website that tracks contracts and things of that nature in professional sports, they predict that Wheaton will be less in terms of average $1 million a year per year salary than LaFell. And that to me was pretty interesting, especially because Wheaton's about 4 years younger than LaFell. So, if they're going to go in outside free agency for a receiver, I prefer they look at LaFell, a guy like Marcus Wheaton. Kenny Stills is another guy that's out there that's a deep threat that could bring some real speed to this offense. I like Victor Cruz. I just don't see the fit. That's my thing with it. Any additional thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I think that kind of all the points you said are good ones. I think the one thing that would have to be considered too, and the one thing that we can't tell by sitting here, is what kind of locker room guy is he? Because it seems to be the impression you get from the Bengals is when they bring a veteran in, it's someone that can mesh with the younger players and kind of help mold the younger players, help kind of bring them in, show them the ins and outs. Is he one of these guys who's going to come in and say, yeah, I'm not the guy I used to be. I'm going to settle, be number 3, number 4 wide receiver. I'm going to show you the tricks of the trade to help make you better, Tyler Boyd. I'm going to help make you better, Cody Core. Or is he guys going to come in and say, no, I'm fighting those guys for a spot. I want to be that second guy. It's about me. It's I want more. And I think wasn't one of the reasons the Giants cut him because he wanted more money or wanted a substantial amount of money. I think the Giants were like, yeah, screw that. We have better guys who are younger, cheaper. You're gone. So I don't know what his mentality is. I'm guessing he's probably not the locker room guy that would have the mindset they would bring in. They tend to be fairly particular about those free agents, that they have to have that right kind of mindset that LaFell kind of had. He seemed to be a team first guy, a guy who had success, who seemed to be more interested in, I want to see the team do well. I want to help the team. I want to mesh with the team. I want to do things the team way, that help lead the team, help, get everyone to go in the same direction, be the locker room guy, the guy in the practices. If that's Victor Cruz, I've never heard Victor Cruz and those comments go together, but if that is him, I could see them pursuing him. Otherwise, I think it would be a surprise.
Yeah, and there's two sides to that. LaFell obviously is a very low-key guy, and one of the things they obviously like that about him, and they also like the fact that he won a Super Bowl with the Patriots, and the experience and leadership and all of that comes with being a championship player. Cruz has also won a Super Bowl with the Giants, but as we've seen in recent years, that Giants receiving core with Beckham and Cruz and others can be a little bit me first and not so much team first. And they also added Sterling Shepard last year for their team, and obviously they like him, they like Beckham, and that's how they're moving forward. So we'll see how that plays out. We're going to do one final question and get out of here, Scott. It was actually, we've kind of hit the trifecta. We've had Twitter questions, we've had questions from the YouTube chat, and now we've got one from Cincy Jungle. And it's from a commenter who calls himself Keithster. This is interesting, and I don't know how much insight you have on this, but he asks, how much, if any, did Andy Dalton's thumb impact his accuracy and or confidence in the beginning of this year? Any thoughts on that? Obviously you saw Dalton kind of get through some bumps in the road, whether it's, feeling out new receiving options, a new coach, offensive line issues. He still didn't create many turnovers. He was pretty low on that spectrum, but just wasn't as exciting in 2015. Do you think there's a physical and or mental aspect with the thumb injury that lingered, or was it just a perfect storm of a combination of all those other factors?
I'm still convinced. I think, at least to me, from my perspective, a lot of it just looked to be the new offense. Losing Hugh Jackson, bringing in and not so much losing Hugh as much as it was the guy who replaced him. He just did not, it was his first stint ever as an offensive coordinator, especially at the NFL level. And there were just a lot of times where the play calling just seemed to be very predictable. They weren't able to get guys open. They weren't able to give them the pass protection. And I just think it was a matter of the system. It seemed as the year went on, they seemed to get a little more comfortable as a unit. They seemed to be doing a little better job. And I know early on we were trying to say, well, it's not so much that, it's just Eifert's out. As soon as Eifert gets back, everything gets better. Eifert got back, things didn't get better. And I think we just saw that, the play calling wasn't there. The scheme wasn't there. And, I think every week this season we had, on the podcast and the comments on Cincy Jungle and the articles, you had a very similar theme that was, hey, this offense just isn't, blocking isn't right. The, guys aren't getting the ball. The play calling is horribly predictable. We don't seem to have any sort of, rhyme or reason what we're doing. Obviously, we're not making second half adjustments. To me, I think those were a lot bigger of an impact than the thumb. Now, I'm saying that as an outside observer who has never actually seen Andy Dalton's thumb. I think we've all seen his rubber, ring he wears on his hand. I don't think that affected anything. But as far as his thumb, it'd be hard for us to say.
If we're talking mental issues, or if there's a potential for him, being hesitant because of either getting hurt, or I didn't see a ton of, fluttery passes or really errant throws. I mean, they were some here and there, but I didn't really see it. To me, if there was a mental thing that got to Andy Dalton last year, it was the play of the offensive line. And there were times where he scrambled in games where he experienced a lot of pressure, a lot of sacks. There were times where he actually had a clean pocket and ended up scrambling out of it and not letting a play develop. Now, it wasn't a plaguing issue, but there were times where plays could have been made had he hung in there after taking so many hits and sacks throughout the season. That's something I worry about far more than the thumb. Once a quarterback gets skittish, that's very hard to get him out of that kind of mindset. I don't foresee it being a long-term problem, especially if the Bengals shore things up, whether it's re-signing guys up front and or adding talent to the offensive line or doing things differently schematically to help with the pressure. But that, to me, was the thing that stuck out the most in terms of a mental hurdle for Andy Dalton last year. I think overall he took pretty good care of the football. He finished with his second highest passer rating in his career, 91.8, after finishing at a ridiculous 106.2 the year before. Only had 8 interceptions. He had 5 fumbles, but definitely wasn't forcing the ball elsewhere. A pretty noticeable dip in touchdowns. Only 18 passing touchdowns. Did have 4 rushing touchdowns, so they asked him to still do that. But I think it's not the thumb. I think it's protection, and I think Andy Dalton is a good NFL quarterback. He's not. I hate to use the word elite. He's not an elite quarterback. He's not a top 5. He's probably hovering around that top 10 area, and this is a topic of much debate. But he's a guy that if you give him protection and you give him weapons, you saw it in 2015, he can be close to that top 5 quarterback because he gains confidence with all of the guys around him. And who knows what would have happened with the Bengals had he not, injured his thumb in 2015, if they would have ended up beating the Steelers at home or whatever the case may be. There are just a few things that you need to do with Andy Dalton, one of which is, fix the line problems we saw last year, get him some more talent around him in terms of the skill positions. But it's on Andy Dalton as well to start winning these big games. And he has to play better in these Steelers games. He has to play better against the Ravens, even though the Bengals have a pretty good record against the Ravens lately. He has to play better against them. And he has to play well on primetime, whether it's against those teams or other teams. And, I don't think any of this has to do with Keithster's question about a thumb or anything like that. I think it's scheme. I think it's jitters. I think it's playing better competition that all add up to that. But overall, I think that the Bengals need to make a lot of improvements to, again, help out their quarterback this offseason, whether it's in the draft or free agency. Scott?
Well, and it's very true that, if you finish with a top 10 pick, which the Bengals have, there's obviously a reason you have that pick. Usually you don't have that pick because you're one guy away from the Super Bowl. Obviously they are a year away from coming really close to that 12-4 season when they looked like a contender until Dalton got hurt. But, you obviously have multiple holes that we've talked about today, and we're going to talk in the future. So, yeah, there's definitely things they need to do going forward. Getting the guys healthy, but also, getting the scheme, getting the right plays, and making sure they have everything locked in, everything, all those holes filled, not just for this year, but for the upcoming years. We've kind of highlighted on some of those in some of the positions. There's just a lot of key positions. They are just really shallow right now. And granted, I know some of that changes as they hit free agency and they re-sign some of their own, but still, if you looked at the roster right now, there's there's definitely some spots they need to be making sure they're looking at.
Yeah, and you look, I hate to sound like a broken record, especially when it was just one episode ago. You look at what the Atlanta Falcons did last offseason. Matt Ryan is probably looked at universally as a slightly better quarterback than Andy Dalton, especially in terms of raw talent. But there are a lot of career parallels there, and especially with Andy Dalton making 5 straight postseason berths, and that's not really Matt Ryan's resume. But if you look at the Atlanta Falcons this year, obviously they had the 2 talented running backs. They added Mohamed Sanu and Taylor Gabriel to their offense. They traded for Alex Mack, the center. They signed Tom Compton, a tackle for them to boost their line. And then they did some things on defense in free agency in the draft. So, their activity helped out a good to very good quarterback, but one that's not universally considered in the top 5 in the NFL. And that's what got them to the Super Bowl. So I think if the Bengals really focus on that, plugging some holes on defense, building some depth there, but really looking at the offensive line and the offensive skill positions and say, how can we help out our quarterback? How can we do that? And I think we'll see some good things for the Bengals in 2017 and hopefully a quick rebound from a poor season last year. Scott, this has been fun. The fan questions have been coming at a big pace. We normally don't answer this many, but there were a lot of good ones, and we wanted to make sure that we got them on all of the 3 mediums that we broadcast on, so we wanted to get to them. So appreciate your time. I know we went a little long, and appreciate your insight on these questions.
And I think and the interesting thing is a lot of the questions are on the same thing, which is the draft. And I think that's something that the Bengals, they just have to make, with as many picks as they have this year and having high picks, they just have to make sure they get it right. Because it's been, since 2010, 2011 that they've really done a great job in the draft. And you look at, a lot of these guys that have been taken higher in the draft, like Paul Dawson, Will Clark, Mohamed Sanu, Dante Moak, Brandon Gee, Jake Fisher, Margus Hunt, Devin Still, Obuehi, Denard. There's just a lot of guys who they've been taken higher that just really haven't panned out. And they just, at some point, they just have to get back to those drafts where they just nailed them. I think 2010, 2011, they did that. They've been living off that for a while. And that window's closing. And, hey, you've got some high picks. Not they're going to hit every pick, but, yeah, it's definitely a year to at least get some of them.
Yep, got to do that, and you got to spend the money wisely in free agency and spend it in general. They've sat on it the last couple of seasons, and it really has not done them any favors. And this, I think, it culminated last year, and I think they really need to make some wise moves and spend some money in free agency, and both internally and externally, as well as, like you said, Scott, hit on a number of picks this year. That's going to be huge for them in 2017. That's going to do it for us tonight, this special Monday edition of the show. Thank you to the viewers who tuned in live. I know this was kind of last minute. Unfortunately, the host schedules were a little wacky. We missed our friend Connor Howe. He couldn't make it tonight, unfortunately, but we missed him. And we do appreciate all of the feedback and all of the questions we received this week. We received a lot of them. Appreciate that. You can check out the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, or Cincy Jungle, and you can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI or via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. For Anthony Cosenza and for Scott Schultz, I should say, for Scott Schultz, I'm Anthony Cosenza. Why don't we do it that way, Scott? Isn't that the way to do it?
I'm not sure, but Scott Schultze might agree.
I can't wait to hit the edit button on this part. I can't wait to do that. Okay, let's try this again. Let's do this. For Scott Schultze, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This has been the Orange and Black Insider. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for downloading our material. We hope to talk to all of you and interact with all of you listeners and readers soon. Have a good week. Happy Valentine's Day. Hooday.
Hooday. And if you disagree with us on your favorite Star Trek captain, be sure to let us know.
Star Wars is better.